Welcome back to the channel, and you're here with Nate28, and this is Crossbeats Production. So I thought I'd bring to you guys a mastering tutorial. I might have to actually split this tutorial into a couple of different parts, but I wanted to give you some kind of key basics to what I look for when I do mastering, and to give you an understanding of the concept behind it as well, just a small understanding at least. And also just to show you the chain of processing that I've used on this particular track. So it's coming up to Christmas, which is really great because, you know, I think everybody tends to like that time of the year except for the Grinch and people of the like. But basically with this particular track, it is surprisingly a Christmas track, and it's not the type of stuff you'd probably see on my channel, but I'm doing this as a mastering for an artist out there called Gower, and he wanted this track mastered in time for Christmas, obviously because it's a Christmas track, and I'm sure it'll be probably released several years later as well. But as far as I know, it's going to be on iTunes either today or tomorrow. So if you want to check this track out, you'll hear it on iTunes, and just look for the name Gower. I'll try and attach some links into my my video once I get them as well, so if you want to get this track. But anyway, I want to show you just a brief overview of the track, so I'm not going to give too much of it away because it's not released. Well, it might be released actually by now, but it's just a track that I wanted to show you guys. So pretty much what I want to give you an understanding of first was the keys to mastering a track, and I guess getting it relevant to other tracks that are out that are similar genre and things like that. So the first thing I was looking for on this track was, I asked the artist actually if they could provide a track. Well, I didn't ask the artist, the actual label that I work with, Down Under Label Group. They supplied a track that was from this particular artist that he had mastered somewhere else. So I wanted a reference track. Now, you could make a whole video just on this, but I'll just give you a brief overview. So with any kind of mixing, with any kind of mastering, any sort of production, I guess, really, if you're getting a track to a final stage, you want something to reference it back to. Now, when you reference your track to, say, a hip-hop track or R&B or a rock track or whatever it might be, you want to have something that sounds similar to the track that you're working on, so you can go and compare the two and go back and forth between the two and hear where yours is at and hear where their track's at. That's kind of what I did in this, and this is what I'm trying to say to you. When you're mastering any genre of music, if you have a reference, it makes it a lot easier to compare and know where you're at with your track. So that's what I did with this track. I got a reference track, and that's why I've got 3 tracks lined up on this project here. So first off, I had my reference track, and I listened to that, and I was like, okay, that's what the reference track sounds like. That's cool. How can I make the track that I've got sound like that? Now, what I'll do is this little button here, and I'll just zoom in there. That button there, it turns off all the plugins on the track. So if you're looking for a quick way to hear what your plugins have done and versus what they're doing, that's a really good way of doing it. So just click that little button there. It turns them all off. It turns them back on, such like that. So this track, I'll just play you a quick snippet, and then I'll just show you the difference between the pre-master and the master itself. So this is the pre-master. This is how I received the track. And I'll just play it to you, and then I'll play the actual mastered version of it. Now, it's not a huge amount of difference, but you're going to notice there's a little bit of volume level difference, and that's obviously because it's got a little bit louder, but there's a differences in that track as well. So just check it out. So there you have it. If you're listening on a pair of really good headphones, you probably would want to do that, or a really good pair of monitors or whatever that can control the bass. or at least give you bass response, because that's one thing that's been added in depth to this track is the bass response on the actual track. When I was looking at the track itself, I listened to it, I heard it the whole way through, and I thought, before I got anywhere into mixing any of it, or mastering I should say, I thought about what needs to be done on this track and what potentially could be fixed, and what should I leave alone. Now, I guess for myself anyway, I like to make personal notes in my mind. Some people like to write them down. It's probably a better idea to write it down, to be honest, but for some reason, I just don't do that. I don't know. But I like to make mental notes, and the way that I would look at this track, first off, was when I first heard it, I thought, okay, if I make it too loud and just push it way too much, it's not going to sound good. It's going to sound crushed. The second thing I thought was if I push it really loud as well, and you know, especially with processing with EQ, there's a tendency with mastering, because you're doing a master bus EQ, you're tended to sometimes drive top end more than it's necessary and bring out harshness in the mix. And you've got to be really, really careful as well, because I found with this particular track, the top end was a little bit too harsh, and I had to try and tame that. And I want to show you in a second video probably on how exactly I did that, but I'll give you a brief overview in this video on how I did it. But with the top end, I was really careful not to take away too much of the character that it had, but not to take away as well the brightness of the track. I tried to leave it similar to the mix in that sense of the brightness, and I didn't want to increase it too much because it sounds a bit harsh, especially when you're listening in earbuds or things like that. Looking at this track anyway, so what I did was, the first chain of processing was, surprisingly, a de-esser. This came along later on though, because when I got to the final stages of the mastering, I found that the track was too harsh, so I had to tame that and give it a little bit of de-essing on the top end. So surprisingly, de-essing is really handy for a lot of different things. You can use a de-esser on low end, you can use a de-esser on a vocal, you can use a de-esser on the top end of your track, and you can use a de-esser for mastering if you need to. The reason why I used a de-esser in this instance was because with high-end frequencies, the transients, if you want to get rid of them, you have to really put a fast attack and a fast release. You can use a multi-band compressor to do that kind of similar thing as well, but I found that the de-esser was a little bit different in sound, so I used a de-esser, and I really just didn't do a whole lot with the de-esser. Like, if you look at the actual de-esser when it's going, I'll just show you. Okay, so it's hardly doing anything, and it's really there when the peaks of the transients are there. So, I had to be real careful with the de-esser, because, if you start to de-ess too much, especially on the master bus, you'll really notice that it takes away from that character on the top end. Now, with this track, it was really hard to not take away from the top end and to keep the characteristics there. But that's what I found worked really well, and it seemed to work, and it got approval from the artist, so it seemed to work well there. Now, first thing, that's what I've got there. I did have a multi-band compressor, which I did set up, and that was the setup that I had, but I ended up taking that off, and I just ended up using the de-esser there. So that was the first plugin. Now, closing that off, the next plugin that I used, you'll see Neutron on here as well, and I'll explain why in a second. Actually, I might just do that now. So Neutron, I used Neutron to figure out a couple of things. So not that I didn't really know myself, but EQ. So I would never do a curve like that, probably on the master bus. I don't even know where that's at. Let me just check. 68 kilohertz. Okay, so that's probably taking away a little bit too much of the low end, for my personal opinion. Anyway, it might be alright for certain tracks, but this track I wouldn't do it. But when I use the track assistant, that's what it did. So it was just funny to watch it, because I just like to see what the track assistant does on the master. I've done another video on that, and I'm sure people will like that, so I might do another little tutorial, I guess, on that. But the good thing about this is it sometimes shows you frequencies that are negative to the track, and it dips them out automatically as part of the track assistant. And that's kind of kind of good, I guess, in a sense, because you can learn where the frequencies aren't benefiting the track, and you can use this to your advantage to, one, learn where frequencies usually are bad, and two, on your mix, in this existing mix, you can use it to help you see where you can take out frequencies on your own track. I took this approach just to see, for an example. It wasn't something I actually ended up using. As you can see with my EQ down here, it's a little bit different, and I'll explain that all in just a minute. And that's probably why I want to do a couple of different parts of this video, but I will explain that. So the EQ that I took out was at 104, but it's using a dynamic EQ, so it's not constantly taking out that frequency, so it's probably a little bit more proficient in that area. So the next frequency was at 1200, and I'm assuming it took that out because that's kind of like a harsh kind of frequency on this particular mix. And as you can see, it goes a little bit higher up in this area there. But that was just funny to watch that, and it kind of, I guess, gives you a good gauge. If you have Neutron to use, maybe you can just put Neutron on your master bus, hit the track assistant, take off the compressor and all that sort of stuff later on if you want, or leave it on, whatever you feel like it's going to work for your track. But I mean, even the compressor, if you're just looking at the compressor itself, it's got interesting settings there. It's got like a similar kind of setup sort of to what I did, but not really. So the attack was quite fast. It's 50 milliseconds. It's not really that fast for a master bus, so it's pretty good actually. It adapted quite well. But then the smart thing about this compressor was that it actually used a really fast attack on the top end of the frequencies, and somewhat mid-speed release, but then it mixed it in at 60%. That's kind of interesting how it chose to do that, and that's funny because I guess a de-esser could work similar to that on the top end, and that's kind of what I did with my de-esser when I used the de-esser on there. I had a lot faster attack on there. What's this at? 0.1. I've got 1.4, so a little bit different, and I got a broadband style de-esser going on, but my attack's like there, and my release is at 36 milliseconds, so it's a lot faster than this one was. But interesting enough, it's kind of a similar approach. So we'll just close that off, close Alloy off as well. Alloy's pretty good if you want to use that for a multi-band compressor as well. The next thing was this compressor here. This is the Elysia mastering compressor. It's actually really good, and I'm sure that I got this on special. And if you're looking at this video right now, there's a Black Friday sale on the where is it? Plug-in Alliance. I'm sure that they have that on their site as well, and it's made by that group as well. So this is a UAD version, so if you have the UAD hardware, you're able to get this as a plug-in. That's how I got it, and I got it on special, so that's why I bought it. And since then, I've used this for a lot of different tracks, and I really like this compressor. It does a lot of different things to different materials. So anyway, so what I did with this was I used the soft clip feature to bring a little bit more headroom in, and also used the compressor very minimally, but it just gave it a little bit of extra sound. And I took the mid-side mode off, and I've just channel linked it there, and it's just got minimal compression going on, but it does create a good sound. It just brings the mix together a little bit more. I believe that was the next compressor. So then following that, I had the Neve. Neve compressor is quite an interesting character. It's got the Neve, I guess that Neve character to it, the old vintage sort of sound. Similar, I guess you could think of the SSL similar to that as well, but the Neve's obviously older compressor than the SSL is, or at least I think it is anyway. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, I'm sure you will. But anyway, so the compression settings on this, as you could see, it's already really loud, this track, so it was really pushing the compressor because of the gain staging in this compressor is more set to analog sort of gain staging, so it was driving the compressor with it really minimally. Like I had this at +10, so I was trying to get away from the actual signal as much as I could. I had it set to an auto release, so A2, which is the second type of auto release. It's got two different auto release settings. This compressor, by all means, you don't have to have these compressors to do what I'm doing, but it just helps give you character to the track. And I guess if you're looking for that sort of character, the analog sort of sound, the Neve sound, that's why I employed this one in this particular mastering job there. So minimal makeup gain, about 0.2, I think, because I was compressing it about, I think, minus 2 dB or minus 3, somewhere like that. But I didn't want to give it back all of the gain that I took out, because I was trying to get a little bit of headroom on the mix. So the compression setting was at 1.5, really minimal. I didn't want to, like on a mastering session, you really don't want to crush your transients, and you're just there to hug the track, pretty much. That's what it's all about. So that's that. That's the compressor that I use for that part of it. As you've noticed, my set of my chain of plugins, I'm really just trying to get a little bit out of each. I'm not trying to use one to completely crush a track or do crazy stuff with it. It's just to try and get one bit out of each part of the plugin that I use. So next one was the SSL. Again, I wasn't compressing a whole lot, and the little bit of makeup that I gave it, I think I was getting about -3, I think, out of this, maybe less than that, actually, -2. Actually, I can just check. I'll just play it quickly. I was getting basically nothing. So that needle is not even moving hardly at all. I don't think it even moved. So more or less, this compressor, actually, I want to explain why I did this, because I forgot and now I remember. So the reason why I put this compressor on there with a fast attack, so at 1 millisecond attack, and the threshold, sorry, the ratio was 4 to 1. It's more or less just to glue the mix. Even if the needle doesn't move, it doesn't mean that it's not doing something. It gives the signal some fullness that you just don't have if you don't have that compressor on there. So you could do the same thing with a ordinary compressor that's in Studio One. So say, for example, I got, where is it? Oh dear, there it is. Say if I've got this compressor, right, and I put this ratio to 4, and just you're obviously playing with the threshold a bit, because you don't want to use the threshold too much. So say, for example, I use the attack of, let's just go with 1 for the sake of this, and I'll see if I can put that on auto release and adaptive. Yeah, I'll just turn the adaptive off, and I'll just see what it does to the track and see what the difference is with the sound. I'll just turn this one off. See, it works really well if you're not using like an SSL like this, that's the UAD SSL. I mean, you don't have to have this. It's just that I like to use it because it's got that, I don't know, it just feels fun to use. And it's got a character to it as well. And it does have certain things that, you might not get directly sound-wise out of this particular compressor. This one's a little bit more clean than this compressor here. But anyway, why I want to show you this compressor was because, if you're using a stock plugin like this, you can definitely achieve some really good sound out of these type of plugins. Like just change your knee, make it a little bit steeper. It will grip the transients a bit differently, and you can throw your threshold up and just get minimal compression. Like, you don't have to get anything hardly. So if you just play with the threshold, bring it down, you'll see this little gauge here. It tells you how much compression you're getting. Just play with it. Just hear it out, listen to it, and maybe switch to mono as well. Even at the start of the mastering track, switch to mono and listen to it in mono, so you can really hear what the compressor is doing. And I listen to my tracks at low volume when I'm trying to hear compression, and it really does help you. I mean, some people on my channel, not people that probably watch it regularly, but there's some doofuses that come on here and say that you can't hear anything in low volume, you can't use a compressor in low volume, why are you using it in mono, all this sort of stuff. And if you just listen and pay attention and spend time to hear what it's supposed to sound like, then you'll start to see that you can actually hear these things. But anyway, off that rant, I just wanted to show you that that's a really good compressor, and you can use that for heaps of different things. It's not just limited to the one thing, you know. So yeah, that's a great compressor. Throw that on there and have a listen to it for yourself. But anyway, that's not on my chain. I just wanted to show you that it works and you can use it. So the next thing was I had the UAD SSL. So the next thing was Ozone 6, which is my mastering suite that I use very frequently for mastering, and I use this in a couple of different ways. The setup that I've got here isn't in a specific order every single time. I don't choose that same order all the time. I just choose it how it sounds on the track, or except for actually the limiter. That always is on the end, no matter what. But the basics of the track, right? When I first started doing the track, I had the threshold right at the top. I didn't touch the sound of the limiter. I didn't want to have any volume increase in the limiter at all. I just wanted to leave it because this maximizes the volume. As soon as you start pulling down the threshold, you'll start to get volume increase if this is up here and it's not following the threshold. I wish, Ozone, if you're listening, I wish you would put in something that I think there's a hearing thing here that you can hear the difference between the track and stuff like that. But I wish you'd have a little button like on the Waves L1 or L2, how you can just drag down the threshold and the ceiling together. That would be really handy if you could do that. Anyway, if you're not, whatever, that's cool. But anyway, a good way to do it, I just usually pull down this, and I'll pull it down as far as I think I'm going to go with the dB increase, and then I'll just pull down my threshold to that level, and then I'll listen to the transients, especially the kick and the snare and things like that are really transient heavy. I'll listen to those and I'll try and hear if there's any distortion with those, because when you're mastering a track, you don't want to have distortion in those areas. You want to have as loud as you can get without destroying the transients and making it a tasteful loudness, not just crushing the crap out of it so it's loud. You want to actually have it tasteful. So first thing first was EQ. Like I said, I'm going to break all of this down further into more videos, but I just want to give you a brief overview of this. So the crazy EQ curve that you see here, that is pretty much giving me the low end that I was looking for, and it is quite a funny EQ curve that I've chosen there, but for a good reason. It's a resonant filter, and the resonant filter comes up to 42.2, and I felt that got rid of some of that low end rumble, but it also gave me back some of the real thick bass low end on the kick drum there. So that's how I got that kick drum to sound so full, and it's not a wrong move if it sounds right. That's all I can say. If you think this looks wrong and you don't do it because it looks wrong, that's wrong thinking. You should only do it when it's actually sounding bad. So if you hear people say that, EQ moves, they shouldn't be doing certain things in certain areas, don't listen to anything they have to say, because it comes down to tasteful representation of the image that you're mixing. So if it actually works in the mix, then go for it. Don't listen to that rubbish that people just think, oh, I can't look that way, it can't be a certain way. It can be any way it wants to, as long as it actually works and it doesn't create phase issues and things like that. So that's one thing I did in this track. I used a resonant filter, so obviously I'm increasing a little bit of the low end, and it's giving me that thick low end sound that I was after. Next filter was a reductive filter, and that was at 259, and that kind of got a little bit of the boxy sound out of the sound. So I was just getting some tiny amounts out of that, so minimal amounts at 0.6. Next filter there was the mid frequencies, which I believe Neutron did, similar to that anyway. So minimal amount, just 0.5, because again, this is over an entire mix. You don't want to go in there and start reducing heaps of frequencies, because it's going to start to make the mix actually sound really bad. And you'll notice eventually, once you get used to hearing frequencies, you'll notice that things are missing in the actual mix. So then the next one was 2.1. Again, really minimal amounts, and I try to do narrow filters on there, kind of mid-narrow filters, not too narrow, but enough to make it sound good without destroying it. Then the next one was at 4.4. These are all frequencies that I found by using this filter here. So on the Apple keyboard, it's the Option or Alt key, probably the Alt key on the Windows, I don't know. But if you use this filter, you just scan across like this, go slow enough that you can hear stuff, and just scan for the frequencies that you don't like, and then start reducing them. It's simple as that. It's not that hard to do. It really isn't rocket science. I mean, there is science behind it. Obviously, there's mathematical effects on the frequencies and things like that. But in all essence, if you're new to mastering or you're trying to understand what mastering is, really, mastering is to make the track tasteful. Now, that's all I really did when I came at this. I came at it in a mindset that I didn't want to change too much of their mix because their mix was good. I wasn't there to go in there and just, do my own thing on the mix. I was there to present the artist and make the artist come out and come alive in the master. And that's what I ultimately was trying to do in this entire mastering process. So next thing was 20K, a small dip, really minimal amount, 0.4 again. Next thing was a reduction. Where is this filter? Sorry. Yeah, that was actually an increase, my bad. That's at 20K. I actually gave it a 0.4 increase, so I got that little bit of air out of there. And the other filters the other way around. Sorry, my bad on that one. So at the 9K, 10K kind of frequencies are really harsh normally, unless they're there for a reason. But most times out of 10, the vocals have harshness in the 10K area. Other things like a snare has some sort of harshness sometimes, depends on the type of snare. But anyway, I found in this master, it needed to have that removed, and that was really minimal amount again. And the filters are kind of similar again. It's a peak filter, and it's at that frequency there. So that, to be key, is in the mono frequency, right? So at the start, I switched this from stereo to mid-side. So this is all the mono frequencies that I'm reducing in the mono field. So if you look at it and think about it in the sense of your bass, anything that's in mono is in the mono field, right? So then the next thing is your stereo field, which I did a separate EQ for, and I'll explain this in just a minute. So the first thinking that I have with this stereo field is to remove the low end frequencies, which I did do, and I used a high pass filter. You have to be careful when you're using a high pass filter because of phase and phase correlation issues, but I didn't think that it affected the phase when I did it, and I didn't hear the phase issues at all. And especially the way to, I guess, get an understanding of phase and hear phase issues is you put your mix into mono, and that will really help you understand and hear the phase problems in your mix. You can hear it a lot easier in mono. It must just be a psychoacoustic thing. I don't know exactly why it's like that. Maybe I should read up on it, but in mono, I can really hear phase issues, and they just pop out really quickly, and you start to tell what's going on. So anyway, I popped it into mono earlier on, but in this particular situation, when it was in the stereo field, as you can hear, no sound. Of course, because it's in stereo. So that at that point, you have to take your mix out of mono and put it into stereo, and then you can hear the stereo field. So this is the stereo field I was working on, and there's two aspects that I was thinking about when I was working on the stereo field, and I'll just explain them briefly to you now. First was the low end. I didn't want the stereo field to interfere with the low end of the mix, and I wanted my kick to sound really punchy and like it was coming straight in the center. And especially on headphones, it's really hard to make your kick sound punchy unless you have really good headphones, like I'm talking about like really cheap headphones, which some people listen to them on, and that's where I was trying to get the sound to still sound existing in that type of scenario. Anyway, so the next thing I removed was some of the 800K, and that was at minus 1.1, which is a little bit more than I used on the stereo field for most part. That was a different frequency anyway, so it was at 1K, and then on the stereo I used it a little bit lower down. So again, the same thing applied there. I just used this, scrolled across, listened to the frequencies that I don't like, and then I reduced them. So the differences here is that I used a bit more frequency reduction on the 7K area. Next band was the 9K area. Again, that kind of that harsh frequency hissing sound. Your sibilances and things like that are in the 10K kind of frequency area. And then the final thing was a high shelf resonant filter. I find resonant filters sound more natural as well, so that's why I tend to use a resonant filter on this, but really minimal amount. That's at 16.2. Since it's coming down further closer to the other frequencies, I didn't want to interfere with it that much, so I just removed out minimal amount, 0.3. That's the stereo field as I played it. You can hear it there. Okay, so there's a key to understanding where the stereo and the mono images should sit in correlation to each other. That's probably another tutorial which I might do in the next couple of days or weeks or wherever, because it's coming up to Christmas. It's a bit harder to do tutorials, but I definitely want to get more on my channel for you guys. And I want to say thanks as well. So I don't want to drag this on too much longer. I might explain this whole entire chain just briefly, and then I will come back and do another full comprehensive on it. So next thing was the exciter. You know, as you can see, it's got a bit of exciting going on with the dual triad, and oversampling clicked on with a bit of a low pass filter. That just removes some of the top end out of the actual the exciter, so it doesn't create issues with that. Next thing was the dynamic compressor, which is a multi-band compressor basically. And you can see all of the different bands, how I've affected them, and I'll explain the ratios in the next video. But low end ratio 2.2, mid-range frequencies 1.5, and again 1.5 all the way up the rest of the chain there. And a little bit different attacks and release settings on these, as you can see. And again, with this top end frequency, a real fast attack and a mid kind of speed release. Anyway, so that's that. Again, I'll explain that in more depth, and I'll go into that again. Let me know in the video if you want me to do that. So the comments, I mean. So the next thing was the correlation meter or imager, and this is a bit of an interesting one. So mid-ish kind of range frequencies, I've made them a little bit wider, and the low end frequencies from 158 downwards are completely mono. Up forward from that is the mid to top end frequencies. I've made them a little bit less wider, but gave them a little bit of width. And the real high end frequencies, I left it pretty much alone, just a tiny bit of width. I felt like it needed that extra width to create that fullness in the track, and especially in headphones as well. The stereoizer is fantastic to make it a little bit more wider as well, and that really created some great stereo width to the track. Key thing here though is to watch this correlation meter and to make sure that you're still in phase, and you know, see that the track is still definitely in phase, because that's key to making it sound right. If your track's out of phase, and you're going to hear things that are really weird, not good sounding, that's for sure. Next EQ, I just took that out because I'm not actually using that, and I might just minus that out of there so I don't need it. Then from there was the maximizer limiter. Okay, speed was the characteristics of 3.9, so that's quite a reasonably mid-range, slowy, fast. Actually, it's a fast kind of release, not too fast, so you could get a lot faster than that, but it sounded right in that speed there. The tube was the one I ended up going with. I did like IRC2, but I ended up switching to the tube in the end because it just sounded more natural, and that's why I chose it. Next thing was the dithering. 16K for CD. Obviously it's going to be on iTunes, so it needs to be at that 16-bit depth, and I used a strong dithering and a high noise shaping, and I used the filter to DC offset as well, so I created a little bit extra headroom doing that, and I put the peak limiter on there as well, so it's stopping anything going over the top of the threshold. And that was it. That's how I got the track to sound the way I did. The other thing I used as well at the start, and I still use this a lot, was the Brainworks level, the leveler there. It's just really great to check in the levels and to see how much dynamic range that you have in your track, the correlation, the balance, and things that are happening there. So that's another tutorial altogether, but I just wanted to show you I had that on there as well for most part of the mastering chain there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up, and always remember to subscribe to the channel because it does help me out, and I'll keep doing more and more of these videos as you guys subscribe and give me comments and things like that. Without further ado, I hope you enjoy that, and peace.